Président du Conseil des ministres italien.
Caro Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri della
Dear President of Italy.
The Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, with us today. Prime Minister, let me start by thanking you for accepting our invitation to address the European Parliament as part of our This is Europe debates, where together with European leaders we discuss our common agenda for Europe's future. We know, dear colleagues, Prime Minister Draghi as a committed European who, as President of the European Central Bank, already steered the Eurozone out of a crisis that could have seriously undermined our monetary union. Prime Minister, it is largely thanks to your vision, your commitment and your steady hand that we got through. You gave confidence to our people and to our banks. And I have no doubt that we can rely on your expertise as Europe again faces challenges of a different kind, but that are just as existential in nature. After the Russian army's illegal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, Europe faces another whatever it takes moment. We have seen unprecedented European coordination, solidarity and unity against this war. And this must remain the blueprint for us going forward, be it on further sanctions, on sending aid to Ukraine, on disentangling ourselves from energy dependence on the Kremlin, helping the millions forced to flee, or building a new security and defence union. So, Prime Minister, you guided your country through the worst of times, coming out from the pandemic stronger. We know that we must take stock of lessons learned and ensure that we have the flexibility that we need to care for our populations. We must build our future in a sustainable manner that protects the next generation, and we can do this, and I know that we will look to you for a way forward. Prime Minister, let me also thank Italy and the Italian people for your leadership on migration in the Mediterranean. You have borne the responsibility thrust upon you in a humane and value-based approach, and it is now on us to ensure a way forward where Italy and other states do not feel alone. Next week, on Europe Day, we will receive the conclusions from the Conference on the Future of Europe. The onus will be on to us to listen and to act. And in terms of responding to people's demands on policy changes in health, climate, security and more, no suggestion for change should be off limits, because if not now, then when? Presidente, a lei la parola.
President Metsola, members of the European Parliament, citizens. I'm very pleased to be here at the heart and in the cradle of European democracy. Let me begin by paying tribute to the memory of David Sassoli, who was President of the European Parliament during difficult years.
Durante la pandemia il Parlamento.
During the pandemic, the Parliament continued to meet, take discussions, take decisions, and that shows its institutional vitality and is a testament to Mr. Sassoli's leadership. He never stopped working towards a new project of hope, as he called it in his last speech to the European Council. He worked for a Europe that innovates, protects, and enlightens, and this vision of Europe is today more necessary than ever before. I'd like to thank President Metsola and all of you for your contribution in moving forward this idea every day. The war in Ukraine means that Europe is facing one of the greatest crises in its history. It's a security, humanitarian, energy and economic crisis all rolled into one. Our countries are still dealing, in addition, with the consequences of the greatest health crisis we've had in the last 100 years. The European response to the pandemic was an effective and brave one. Scientific research enabled us in an unprecedentedly fast manner to develop vaccines that prevented contagion and reduced the severity of the disease. We organised the most impressive vaccination campaign of recent history, which has enabled us to save lives, put children back into school and relaunch our economies. We adopted Next Generation EU, the first major European reconstruction project, funded through a contribution made by everyone to deal with the specific requirements of every member state individually. This determination and readiness to act, this spirit of solidarity, they need to be the things that guide us in the challenges we now face. The institutions that our predecessors have built over decades have served European citizens well, but they're inadequate for the situation that arises today. The pandemic and the war have meant that European institutions have had to take on unprecedented levels of responsibility. The geopolitical situation is changing rapidly, and we have to move and move fast. We need to ensure that managing the crises that we're living through don't lead us back to our starting point. We need to move to a fairer and more sustainable economic and social model. We need pragmatic federalism, which embraces all areas struck by the current changes: the economy, energy policy, security policy. I mentioned pragmatic federalism, but I should also add that our European values of peace, solidarity and humanity need to be defended now more than ever. Now more than ever, it is difficult for individual states to defend these values, and it will continue to be more and more difficult. We need pragmatic federalism, yes, but we also need a perfect federalism. This is the start of a path that will lead to treaty revision, and if that's going to be the case, we should embrace it.
Se dagli eventi tragici di questi anni,
if we manage from the tragic events of recent years, we can take steps forward, and if we can make our institutions more effective and make them better able to find solutions for our citizens, well then I think that we will be able to build a Europe in which people feel proud. The Russian attack on Ukraine has called into question the European Union's greatest achievement, peace on our continent. This peace was based on respect for territorial borders, the rule of law, democratic sovereignty. It was based on the use of diplomacy as the means to resolve crises between states. This pace was based on respect for human rights, which have been violated in Bucha, Mariupol, and everywhere else that the Russian army has used violence against innocent citizens.
Dobbiamo sostenere l'Ucraina.
We need to support Ukraine, its government and its people, as President Zelensky has and continues to request.
In una guerra di aggressione,
This is a war of aggression, and it's clear who's invading and who's resisting. We want Ukraine to remain a free, democratic and sovereign country. Protecting Ukraine means protecting ourselves. It means protecting our security and our project of security and democracy that we've built over 70 years. Helping Ukraine means first and foremost working in favour of peace. Our priority is to achieve a ceasefire as soon as possible so that we can save lives and enable interventions in favour of civilians, which are currently very difficult. A ceasefire would also further boost or would foster negotiations which haven't yet achieved the desired results. Europe can and should have a central role in fostering dialogue, and we need to do that because of our geography, which means that we're close to this war. It puts us in the front line when it comes to dealing with all the possible consequences of the war. We also have a duty as a result of our history, which has shown that we're able to build stable and lasting peace, even in the wake of bloody conflicts. Italy is a founding member state of the European Union. We're a country that believes deeply in peace, and we're therefore committed to being in the front line when it comes to achieving a diplomatic solution. The war is already having a deep impact on our countries. Since the start of the conflict, around 5.3 million people have left Ukraine and come to the European Union, and mainly these are women and children. That's more than double the numbers of refugees that were present in the European Union at the end of 2020. The number then stood at around 2.5 million. Italy believes in the European values of welcoming and solidarity. We have welcomed, thanks to the generosity of families, volunteers and NGOs, over 150,000 Ukrainian refugees, and I'd like to thank all those who have welcomed them. Other countries, Poland, Romania, Germany, Slovakia, have made even greater efforts. Many refugees want to go home as soon as possible, and some of them have already started doing that. Nevertheless, we don't know how the conflict is going to develop, and we don't know how long it's going to last. We need to be ready to continue along the path we've taken to ensure that Ukrainian refugees are integrated into our societies as well as possible. In economic terms, the crisis has disturbed international supply chains and has caused volatility in the prices of raw materials and energy. Ukrainian food supplies have crumbled as a result of the devastation of war and the export blocks that have been put by the Russians on the ports in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. The Ukraine is the fourth largest supplier of food to the European Union. It produces around half of our wheat supplies and a quarter of our vegetable oils. Russia and Ukraine also make up around a quarter of global grain exports. Almost 50 countries in the world depend on them for over 30% of their imports. In March, the prices of cereals and the main food supplies reached historic highs, and there's a major risk that the increase in prices, as well as a lack of availability in fertilizers, will produce food crises. According to the FAO, 13 million more people could suffer hunger between 2023 and 2026 as a result of the war in Ukraine. Many countries, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, are more vulnerable to these risks and could go through periods of social and political instability. We can't allow that to happen. Our commitments via development banks, multilateral financial institutions, and our bilateral commitments need to be ramped up. When it comes to energy, the price of oil, which in December and January was between $70 and $90 a barrel, is now around $105 a barrel. It peaked at $130 in March. The price of gas has also gone up massively. It's around 5 times higher than it was a year ago. These increases were already being observed prior to the crisis, but they have pushed inflation to levels that hasn't been seen for decades. In the Eurozone, inflation is at 7.5% in April compared to a year ago, and it is having a major impact on families' purchasing powers and businesses' levels of production. The European economy is slowing down. In the first 3 months of 2022, the Eurozone's GDP increased by 0.2% when compared to the last 3 months of 2021. The IMF predicts that the European Union will grow by 2.9% this year, compared to the 4% forecasts that were in place just a little while ago. Each of these crises would require a strong reaction from the European Union. But given that they're all coming together, means that we decisively need to accelerate the decision-making and integration process. During the coming months, we need to show European citizens that we're up to the task of ensuring that Europe can be up to its history, its values, and its role in the world. Europe needs to be stronger, more cohesive, and more sovereign. Europe needs to be able to take the future into its own hands, as Chancellor Merkel said. During the last 75 years, European integration has often been the best response to common challenges. The founding fathers of the European Union were aware that economic development and social progress were difficult to achieve using the resources of individual member states. They saw the supranational model as the only one that could unite the interests of European peoples and would enable the European Union to influence events that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to have an influence on. Integration has been a gradual process. There have been crises and resets. There have been internal disputes, and there has sometimes been extreme resistance. The result has been built bit by bit and sector by sector. The European Union couldn't be built as an ideal city, as Robert Schuman said. After the Second World War, Europe responded with the first institution for economic cooperation. They restored trade using these institutions, and then you had the European Coal and Steel Community, which did away with customs duties and other barriers which stopped these goods flowing freely. Then in 1956 we had the Suez Crisis, and this further sped up the process towards the Treaty of Rome. The Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971, and when that happened, European countries reacted by creating the European snake and then the European monetary system. Then there was growing scepticism in the 1980s, and the response was a series of targeted interventions proposed by the Delors Commission, and then there was the Single European Act in 1986 at the end of the Soviet Union and the reunification of Germany. Europe followed up with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty and the creation of monetary union, and then enlarged eastwards. The Eurozone crisis around a decade ago led to a boosting and a modernization of our economic institutions, first and foremost among them the European Central Bank. The pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, brought us together again and led to the creation of Next Generation EU. As you can see, this has been a long path of integration and has changed our lives for the better, because it's given us peace, prosperity, and a social model which we can be proud of. The single market hasn't only led to the relaunching of the European economy at a difficult time, but has led to protection for consumers and workers and forms of social welfare that are unique in the world. We've built democratic institutions that are common to all of us, such as this Parliament. And here we can achieve shared decisions and ensure that fundamental rights are respected. We have made the European Union an area that is not only economic, but an area that defends rights and human dignity. And this is a heritage that we cannot throw away. Now it is time to move forward further on this path. On the 9th of May, the Conference on the Future of Europe will conclude, and the final results suggest that we need to be ambitious. We want to be in the front line of designing this new Europe. The geopolitical situation has suddenly become much more uncertain and more dangerous, and we need to deal with economic and social emergencies and guarantee the safety of our citizens. Investments in defence need to be carried out with a view to improving our collective capacities as a European Union and NATO. The last European Council took an important decision when it adopted the strategic compass that needs to be rapidly implemented. We need to go further than these initial steps, however, and build effective coordination between defence systems. Our expenditure on security is around 3 times Russian expenditure, but there are many, many different systems which this expenditure is spread across. This is inefficient and is an obstacle to the construction of genuine European defence. Strategic autonomy in defence requires first and foremost greater efficiency when it comes to defence spending in Europe. We need to hold a conference to rationalise and optimise our defence spending and investment. In addition, the construction of a common defence system needs to be accompanied by a single foreign policy and effective decision-making mechanisms. We need to get over the principle of unanimity.
Dobbiamo superare il principio dell'unanimità.
We need to move forward from the principle of unanimity, which leads to a logic of intergovernmental decisions. We need to move towards decisions taken on the basis of a qualified majority.
Un'Europa capace di decidere in modo.
A Europe which is capable of taking rapid decisions is a Europe that is more credible vis-à-vis its citizens and the rest of the world. A first move needs to relate to the enlargement process. We need to fully integrate countries that have European aspirations. This is not a threat to the European project. This is part of its implementation. Italy supports the immediate opening up of accession negotiations with Albania and the Republic of North Macedonia, in line with the Council conclusions of March 2020. We want to boost negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro, and we want to support the expectations of Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're in favour of all of these countries joining the European Union, and we also want Ukraine as a member of the European Union.
Dobbiamo seguire il percorso.
We need to follow the path that we've designed, but we need also to move along it as rapidly as possible. Solidarity shown vis-à-vis Ukrainian refugees needs to push us to European level of management of migrants who come from other theatres of war. In general, we need to establish an effective European mechanism to manage migration flows, which goes further than the Treaty of Dublin.
Dobbiamo rafforzare e rendere.
We need to boost repatriation agreements and ensure that they're effective, but we also need to boost legal channels for migration to the European Union.
In particolare, dobbiamo
In particular, we need to pay more attention to the Mediterranean, given its strategic location as a bridge towards Africa and the Middle East. We can't see the Mediterranean simply as a border area where we need to put up barriers. Many young countries border the Mediterranean, and they are ready to put their enthusiasm into relations with the European Union. We need to build genuine partnerships with these countries, not only economic but also political and social in nature. The Mediterranean needs to be an area of peace, prosperity and progress. Energy policy is an area in which Mediterranean countries can and should play a key role for the future of Europe. Europe faces a profound geopolitical reorientation, which will shift our strategic axis towards the south. War in Ukraine has shown how vulnerable many of our countries are and how dependent on Moscow. Italy is one of the most exposed member states. Around 40% of the natural gas that we import comes from Russia. We don't have coal, we don't have nuclear power. We barely have any oil either. Given this dependency, we find ourselves vulnerable, and this is dangerous in geopolitical terms. Italy intends to take every measure necessary to defend our security and European security. We've supported the sanctions that the European Union has levied on Russia, including those on the energy sector, and we will continue to do that with the same determination in the future. During recent weeks, we have moved in a rapid and determined manner to diversify our gas supplies, and we've taken important measures to speed up the production of renewable energy, which is crucial to make our economic growth more sustainable. Reducing our Russian imports of fossil fuels mean that it's inevitable for Europe to look to the Mediterranean to satisfy its energy requirements. I'm referring to gas fields because gas can be a transition fuel, but I'm also referring to the massive opportunities offered by renewables in Africa and the Middle East. The countries of Southern Europe, and Italy in particular, have a strategic location when it comes to this energy. We can act as a bridge towards Northern European countries. This central position will depend on the investments that we can make. At the same time, we need to find solutions to protect families and businesses from increased energy costs. We need to moderate people's bills and fuel prices and this will ensure that sanctions are more sustainable. Since the start of the crisis, Italy has asked for Europe to put a ceiling on gas prices imported from Russia.
La Russia vende all'Europa 2/3.
Russia sells almost 2/3 of its natural gas exports to Europe. Many of those go through gas pipelines that can't be reorientated to other buyers. Our proposal would entail using our bargaining power to reduce these massive costs that are weighing down our economies. As well as that, this measure would enable us to reduce the amounts that we send to President Putin on a daily basis, which inevitably end up funding his military campaign. We also want to review the mechanism that sets electricity prices, which is based on the most expensive form of energy, which is usually gas. Even in normal times, the generation of energy from fossil fuels is more expensive than generating energy from renewables. And this is a problem that's going to get worse over time. If we increase the quota of renewable energy into our energy mix, we'll have prices that are even more non-representative of the cost of generating energy if we stick to the current system. There's currently massive volatility on the gas market, and the way that prices are calculated is inappropriate. Gas prices then end up being reflected in the price of electricity. We now get a lot of energy from our renewables, but the cost of that is low, but is not reflected in bills. In Italy, the price of electricity has gone up 4 times from what it was last year, and this is having a major impact on our economy. The Italian government and other governments have reacted to protect businesses and families, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. Italy alone has spent around 30 billion euros on that just this year. Managing this has many limits, however. Sustainability for public finances, for example. The problem is a systemic one and needs to be resolved using structural solutions that break the link between the price of gas and that of electricity. The problem of energy costs will be one that we look at during the next European Council, and we need strong and immediate decisions that will benefit all European citizens. The various crises that derive from the conflict in Ukraine are taking place at a time when Europe already faced massive requirements in terms of expenditure. The digital and environmental transitions require investments which cannot be put off. To these need to be added the costs of the war that we need to deal with immediately to prevent our continent falling into recession. In both cases, these are asymmetric costs that strike different parts of the population and productive sectors in different ways and need to be compensated for in different manners. There's no rational and reasonable budget that can deal with these problems on its own. No country can be left behind. This depends on social peace in our continent and our ability to sustain sanctions, particularly in those countries that, because of their history, are more dependent on Russia. The European Union has already come up with certain tools that are useful to deal with these challenges, and these are responses that we established during the pandemic, which ensured that the European Union had a widespread and rapid economic recovery. We need to base ourselves on that success and adapt these tools to the circumstances we now face. Sure, the European instrument, which provides temporary support for employment in an emergency, supported the labour market. The European Union needs to extend the scope of that to help countries that request funding. They need to be provided with new funding to deal with the burden of energy costs. Here I'm talking about reducing bills, but also providing temporary support to the lowest paid. For example, as we did yesterday, to reduce contributions for the lowest salaries. The advantage there is that we defend the purchasing power of families, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. Using a loan mechanism such as SURE means that we avoid using subsidies to pay for national measures that come under current spending. In addition, we're seeing interest rates going up, and we don't want to see member states' finances getting more precarious, and these kinds of ways of acting avoid member states taking out debt on the markets. This helps to prevent financial instability, and this is a measure that needs to be implemented very quickly now, because we've been in this situation for 8, 9 or 10 months now. This would enable governments to intervene immediately to support their economies. Now, looking at more long-term investments in areas such as defence, energy, food security and industrial security, the model needs to be that of next generation EU. This idea of payments by instalments that are made when objectives are achieved provides a virtuous mechanism that checks the quality of expenditure. This means that we're spending the resources we're given appropriately, and that's crucial for our credibility vis-à-vis citizens and other European partners. As I've said so often, our partners have agreed to tax their citizens to help Italy and other countries who have used these grants.
Il buon governo.
Good governance doesn't mean just responding to current crises. We also need to move fast to anticipate those in the future. The founding fathers showed us how to make democracy in our continent effective in its transformations. European integration is the best tool we have to deal with these challenges with which we're faced. Today, like at every decisive point during the post-war period, we need determination, vision, but above all, unity. I'm sure that we will find these qualities again together. Thank you.
Yes.
Grazie, Presidente Draghi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Draghi.
To the speakers on behalf of the political groups, starting with Manfred Weber on behalf of the EPP Group. You have the floor.
Madam President, dear Commissioners, dear Mr. Prime Minister, welcome, and first of all, congratulations to Roberta. Who else than the Italian Prime Minister should start the new dialogue between the European Parliament and the Member States with this new framing of This is Europe. Italy was always a driver for the European integration. I want to mention Alcide de Gasperi and also want to mention David Sassoli. A lot of European leaders came from Italy, and Italy needs a strong Europe, but also Europe needs a strong Italy. Thank you, dear Prime Minister Draghi, not only for being here today, but also for your brilliant work as an ECB president in the last decade. I want to thank you, first of all, for your leadership in the last period of time as Prime Minister of Italy. The pandemic, Italy was the first target, and finally Italy reacted in a very well-organized way. It became a kind of a role model in managing the pandemic on the European level. It was the RRF, you mentioned it. My party, the European People's Party, with Angela Merkel, with Ursula von der Leyen, also I want to mention Antonio Tajani, other friends, we showed that we are ready to invest in solidarity on European Union's level after the pandemic, to restart our economy, to give a good idea about the future of our economy and our European solidarity approach. Italy is the country who gets its biggest share of this RRF, and you are showing that this money is well spent. You combine this with a reform agenda in Italy, and that is great because for the long run, a good implementation of the Recovery and Resilience Fund gives us on European level arguments for continuation of the European solidarity approach. And also for Ukraine, Italy had a clear position in this conflict, so your clear leadership is good for Italy, but also good for Europe. In crisis, we need more than ever before this kind of leadership. And to also quote Alcide de Gasperi, he said once, a politician looks to the next election, a statesman looks to the next generation. And Europe needs more statesmen and less tactics in Europe. When we describe now the challenges of today, you mentioned a few of them. I could sum up my contribution today and say, well, great, let's do it now. Because we have a lot of these speeches, and when we see ambitious approaches from our leaders on the Council side, when I would frame, let me say, the general consideration from my party's point of view, then I want to underline that Europe must avoid another lost generation. We need a Europe for the youth. We have to shape a Europe of hope and not of fears, and we have to shape a Europe of opportunities and not of limitations. And that's why, you mentioned it, the outcome of the conference for the future of Europe is for us a motivating starting signal to now go further. And that's why, let me really underline, let me really be clear that I'm really happy that you today, as one of the first leaders on the Council side, were outspoken and were clear that after this conference, you are ready for a convention. We need a new power architecture for the European Union. Thank you so much for this leadership. When we speak about the concrete points, then for sure, foreign affairs and defence is a main pillar. We experience a Kiev momentum in the European Union. Citizens are together, showing solidarity with Ukraine friends. And we have to speed up now our efforts to build up a European defence union, integrated for sure into the NATO. You spoke about a pragmatic federalisation of the European Union, federal system of Europe. I want to give you an example. On this defence, the long-term idea is a European army, no doubt about this, but on short-term we should focus on the European added value. For example, on cyber defence, it's obvious that we are much stronger if we do it together. Or on the missile defence system, it's obvious that we can protect our airspace together much more effective than if we do it on national level. So let's focus on the concrete things. We need these kind of flagship projects now to make things possible. The investments would be much more easier, much more cheaper in the future. You mentioned this. And also for our military, it would be much more effective. I want to underline a second point, which is important for us, and that is we only can have a good future for our European Union if we create growth again. The economic strength is the real power base for today's European strength and European Union. And as a central banker, you know, a good future needs a union of growth, but not a union of further debts. And as a family father, you also know that the most important thing for the future of the next generation are opportunities and not additional burden for the next generation. So that's why when we speak about the economic model for the future, we face fundamental changes. We didn't spoke so much in the last weeks about China, about what is happening on the global market, but we know things are fundamentally changing. We speak about independence in today's European Union, but this means also to have a little bit less of globalization, which was the foundation for our economic success in the last decades. So that's why we have to rechange and reorganize the economic model also on global level, and that's why we are strongly fighting for a single market for the free world on the global stage. We have to bring together Australia, India, Japan, all those who believe in our values on the economic base. That can create the precondition for the growth for tomorrow. And finally, on migration, let me underline that there are no Italian, Greek or Spanish migrants, there are only European migrants. It's a common European challenge, and that's why the European Parliament is ready for a solution. You know that we are waiting for the Council to solve the legislative blockade on the Council side. let's go now, after the Ukraine experience, for solving this problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we hear today a leader who was ambitious for the future of Europe. Now it's a moment to implement things. Now it's a moment to do it, to make it real. That is what brings us the trust and the support from our citizens. Let's use this debate, thanks to Roberta Metzola's initiative, for creating exactly the precondition for the delivery process. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I now invite Irache Garcia Perez on behalf of the S&D Group to take the floor.
Gracias.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Dear Prime Minister, welcome to this House, which is the home of European democracy, and thank you very much for the words that you addressed to President Sassoli, because as you said quite rightly, he very well represented the spirit of the European project, and we're going to continue to work, to continue his work, and bearing that spirit in mind. As you've so quite rightly said during your presentation, we're facing a whole series of crises which have been following on one from the other over the past few years and have been exacerbated now by the war in Ukraine. These are not easy challenges, but the best weapon we have is unity and determination in order to tackle these challenges. We saw this already during the pandemic, both from its health aspect and also to taking a look at the economic and social impact. So it's with unity and solidarity that we're able to move forward with Next Generation EU, and the key to facing up to the consequences of the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, is unity and determination. About 10 years ago, when you were president of the European Central Bank and right in the middle of the sovereign debt crisis, and the doommongers were predicting the collapse of the euro, you said three famous words: whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. And I think this is the same spirit that we have to show now in the face of the challenge faced by Putin to our values. And just as was the case 10 years ago, the response to this crisis has to be more integration, because by sharing sovereignty, that's how we are stronger and how we are better masters of our own future. But in order to continue building up our home, our house, we need to lay more bricks. And we urgently need an energy union, a fiscal union, a health union, and a defence union. And I think we really have to make progress in this work, because if we take a look at our project of peace and liberty, which has been developed and growing over the past decades and has established peace and solidarity between our member states and citizens, it's still not enough. And since the Schuman Declaration, then obviously what our union has aimed to do is contribute to peace and freedom based on our values and based on dignity, multilateralism. Unfortunately, the desires of the Ukrainian citizens to become part of this project has cost them dearly. And unlike the Soviet Union, the European Union does not impose anything, doesn't force anybody to do anything, nor does it dominate. What it does, it attracts others through its promises for the future, its values of freedom and human dignity, the kind of things that were demanded by the demonstrators in Maidan in 2013. And we can't close the doors on the Ukrainian citizens. By supporting the legitimate aspirations of Ukraine, it means that we're going to have to rethink our internal policies in the Union, and we need a more sustainable transition, also, obviously, economic development, and also from the environmental and human viewpoint. And we have to try and move away from imports of fossil fuels, which means that we have to diversify renewable energy sources and make sure that any measures we take are also affordable for companies and families. And we should not forget our young people, because they need stable work, accessibility to homes as well. And we really need to send out an optimistic message to these generations of young people who are demanding more and better from the European Union. And they've said as much loudly and clearly during the Conference on the Future of Europe. They want more social policies, they want to reduce poverty. And for them it is absolutely essential that we broaden the suspension of certain tax measures, because unless there is public investment, it's going to be impossible for us to achieve our objectives, whether it's support to Ukraine, help to refugees, or any other of the policies that we have set out. And we're not going to be able to comply with our roadmap, i.e. a fair transition, moving away from energy fossil fuels. Obviously, we need realistic fiscal policies at Mr. Draghi, especially in the times that we're living through now. And what we need to do is make sure that we do something about those who are making enormous profits at the cost of other people, because we've seen that there are certain companies that are making enormous profits, and there are very many families who are falling into poverty and they can't even pay their electricity bills. So we have to do something about these windfall profits of these companies in order to put right this injustice. So we have to continue to move forward with our project, but always focusing, having the well-being and dignity of our citizens at the centre of all policies. And I think we have to say this loud and clear and repeat it so that Putin can hear this, but the Russian people as well. We're going to do whatever it takes to guarantee the future of our European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia Perez. Now on behalf of the Renew Group, Stéphane Séjourné.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, chers collègues.
Prime Minister, colleagues, first and foremost, I would like to thank you for your speech about the European commitment of your government and your contribution to the European debate. You've finished a period that's been too long where some European political players have wrongly looked upon Italy with condescension and indifference at times, which was one of the reasons perhaps for the delay for the European reaction to giving Italy aid during the pandemic. Thankfully, this Assembly has reacted in a timely manner, showing that Europe is helping Italy as much as anywhere else. The recovery plan, the vaccine plan have come about partly because of that. I was recently in Rome and said that Italy still needs Europe and Europe still needs Italy. Italy's ideas and talent. Italy is no stranger to the new European consensus which has been constructed, and heads of state and government in our EU and the European Parliament are part of all that. Obviously we don't agree on everything, particularly regarding the tools, but objectives as well, carbon neutrality, fighting inequalities. In the new consensus, our group wants to know what you think. Everyone agrees on the need to renew our budgetary framework and to move together on economic terms. We need to invest more for green planning and innovation, and also for our continent to come together on strategic terms. What do you think is the best way to move towards that with reform of the Stability Pact? You set out a few things, but the how is essential in the weeks and months to come. A new consensus has come about regarding European solidarity since the Ukraine conflict, the war. Peace and the sovereignty of Europe have been at the heart of deliberations in all governments. We thank you for the political courage needed for your government to look at national positions over the last few decades on that score. You've made declarations, but you've also put them into actions, and you've stood firm against media manipulation, Russian media manipulation, and we'd like to congratulate you for your efforts there. Finally, we'd like to know whether in the sixth sanction package you support the embargo for all fossil fuels from Russia, and whether you think an agreement's possible over the next few days and weeks in the Council. Finally, regarding the conference on the future of Europe, Mr. Draghi, which is particularly important here in this plenary, well, we talk about interinstitutional issues which are very important and that are important for the building of Europe in the years to come. In your speech, I heard you say that we can count upon Italy to defend the reforms that citizens want in Europe. I'm thinking about the end of unanimity in foreign policy. You are very clear about that. Some of your colleagues need to come in line with that, but to take some of these proposals further, the right of initiative of the Parliament on transnational lists, there are important things for our institution to do there too. Finally, Mr. Draghi, the French and Slovenian elections over the last couple of weeks have shown us that Europe is at an important juncture. It's good that populists don't even say anymore that they want to leave the EU. Europhobes haven't come up with solutions at the moment, but their simplistic ideas are still out there and will perhaps carry on prospering because of the lack of hope socially and economically. We need to move towards a social democratic green Europe, and we hope that we can count on you for that and on Italy. The Renew Group stands alongside you in meeting those objectives. Thank you.
I give the floor now on behalf of the Green Group to Philippe Lamberts.
Signore Presidente.
President Draghi, welcome to the European Parliament. With you at the head of the government and Paolo Gentiloni in the European Commission, I think we can say that Italy has renewed its firm European commitment equal to the responsibilities of a founding member of the European Union and the third economic power of the Union. And it's obviously you have assumed your own share of responsibility, a bit more than that in Europe, and that's when it comes to welcoming immigrants, because for many years Italy has been in the front line in the Mediterranean, and they've taken in more than its fair and moral share of immigrants without getting the necessary solidarity from its European allies. And I would like to say that under the previous Parliament, the European Parliament had been willing, on the basis of a broad majority, to review the Dublin rules, and I think we are going to have to get past this doctrine of unanimity in the Council so that we can move towards qualified majority, especially when it comes to immigration, which, I mean, is the case anyway. Whatever it takes. With these three words, when you were President of the European Central Bank, you had taken the measure of the challenge we were facing. In the face of attacks on the financial markets, one had to salvage the euro, whatever it takes. And whatever it takes has now become the alpha and omega of economic policy within the European Union. We have to save lives, but also support workers and businesses, whatever it takes to overcome the impact of the crisis. And today, with Putin's invasion in Ukraine, something that's a test to our determination. And once again, the European Union is going to have to do whatever it takes to help Ukrainians and guarantee our energy autonomy, which is absolutely essential. Italy is exemplary because they have acted in a spirit of unity at the side of their European allies, and this in spite of their huge dependency on Russia. And contrary to others, they have very well understood that this war is a moment where the European Union can prove that it is able to be a geopolitical power. In the immediate future, the efforts being made by Italy to diversify its sources of energy, fossil energy, are understandable. But obviously this is not a long-term solution, and it's only a transition towards renewable energies and energy sobriety, together with guaranteeing a sustainable security of supply, that we can have energy independence and also face up to our climate challenges. So I hear the voice of your government. Well, on the contrary, your environment minister, who keeps going on about a return to nuclear power in Italy, which was rejected massively by the Italian people only about 10 years ago, then obviously we have, and then at the same time, your government seems to be questioning a renewal of your main building renovation program, the Super Eco Bonus 110%, which is an example of good practices by the European Commission. So Mario Draghi, the central banker, refused to integrate these climate constraints into monetary policy, saying that this was up to the political decision makers. So I've heard that, and I'm hoping that that Mario Draghi, head of the Italian government, has heard the message, because obviously those involved, the politicians, have to demonstrate their leadership, and energy transition is absolutely essential, not only in climate terms but also geopolitical terms. Obviously, you have spoken in favour of a reform of budgetary rules, and I think we have to try and move even more swiftly to do this and move towards a true budget union, because it's only all member states together that are going to turn the European Union into a world leader of ecological transition and solidarity and a respected geopolitical power. So we need joint loans financed by shared common taxes to finance common projects. And your country, which is one of the main beneficiaries of Next Gen EU, is a prototype of a budget union of this kind. And I think the best service that Italy can do today is to ensure that this become a European project and prove its success so it can last in the future. Obviously, we've heard about the Conference on the Future of Europe and those who speak in favour of a reform of the European treaties, and this is what it takes. This is what is absolutely essential for this pragmatic federalism, this idealistic as well. This is something that you're speaking in favour of. President Draghi, your own political capital in your own country and within the European Union is undoubtedly huge, and I urge you very much to mobilise this political capital so the European Union can become a key actor in this century. And I'd just like to say, avanti.
I give the floor now on behalf of the ID Group to Marco Zanni.
Grazie.
Thank you, President Metsola, Commissioner Gentiloni, Mr. Draghi. Welcome back to the European Parliament. As you've reminded us, we're up against a critical moment in European history, with a war a few kilometres from us, which requires a strong but credible response in this dark period we're up against. Unfortunately, over the last few weeks, we've seen that the initial conviction to be strong and stand together, member states, European leaders and institutions, has collapsed. Looking at the strategy in terms of how Europe is, which means that we're weak and ineffective and we can be blackmailed, we need to solve these problems before we look to the future. We need to think about the choices we made in the past. We need to find new solutions to problems, and we need to do that quickly. The dependence on countries like Russia has been because of political decisions, and it's mean that our prosperity depends on low-cost energy imports. And this is linked to our production levels, and it's mean that entire economic sectors have been paralysed. But the strategy that we need requires deep change to our industrial and socio-economic models. A few days after the 1st of May, I'd like to raise the issue of work, purchasing power, strategic security of the EU means that we can't just have products made in just one country outside the EU, but they need to be made in EU. But for that to happen, costs will go up, and you're very much aware of this. You're an economist. Economic freedom means paying more, and those products need to be accessible to workers who need to be better paid. looking at a race to the bottom, which is what we saw in unfettered globalization. We need to reverse that trend for because of security risks, apart from other issues. But I'd like to stress one point here. We need sustainable investment, and for that we need to stand together and have a race to the top. Call for quality, sustain costs, but we need to have the right wages. We need to be more independent in terms of supply, but we need to not make the same mistakes we made in the past. Going from Russia's embrace to China's embrace is not a solution. The highest office in the Union need to learn from the past, think about the responses to the dramatic conflict in Ukraine, and we need to think about the right path to take. We need to trust, in terms of trusting on one country to set the strategy for an entire continent. That's not something we can carry on in terms of ideology. That's more ideological than pragmatic. We need to be more pragmatic, less ideologically, more concrete steps, less talk. We need to take action on the environment, defence and so on. We need a true EU response to the energy crisis, looking at the energy mix that varies from country to country. Lifestyles are different from country to country, so I hope that the way things are, that in terms of reality and metaphor, we can move on from the one-size-fits-all rhetoric, which means that in some areas Europe is an obstacle, not a solution. We need to change course, and we need to do that within time. This is an opportunity, Mr. Draghi. We have the opportunity to change. You've talked about changing the European treaties. That is the biggest thing, but there are smaller things we can do together before that. I hope that the Union and our country takes the right track in terms of looking at management of the problems that we have in our country and in Europe. And we'll always stand together with you on that. Thank you.
Now on behalf of the ECR group, Raffaele Fitto.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner Gentiloni, Prime Minister Draghi, well, I'd also like to welcome you to the Parliament on behalf of my political group. This is a difficult and complex time. We certainly need the call for unity which everyone has made, and I think that is a clear condemnation of what's currently going on. I mean, we have an attack on the values of freedom, democracy and peace, and also a humanitarian disaster, and we have to be clear on all of this. And as a political group, as the Conservative group, we've always been clear on our position, and we've strongly supported the line that has been generally taken. And I want to say that because that leads to a reflection also at the national level. I mean, I think there has been hesitation in the past, but I think we have been supportive in our attitude to actions. And I think also it's important to be critical now. I mean, the idea of standing together and moving towards the future without thinking about what's happened in the past and thinking about the mistakes that we've made in the past is wrong, because we risk making the same mistakes. So I think it's important to think about certain elements. I mean, we're certainly not particularly enthusiastic, let's say, about the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which risks ending up as basically a backslapping exercise. And also the calls for the need to put the Mediterranean at the heart of what we do and working with Africa. I mean, I think that really goes against what we've seen during recent months and years. We've seen Turkey and Russia and also China more present there, thanks to the errors that we've made. So I think it's important to reflect on our errors. I mean, also those that have led to a lack of independence in terms of strategic autonomy. I mean, we've had an industrial policy that hasn't led to agricultural, food and energy independence, and we need that if we're going to look to the future in a credible and serious manner. We also believe that it's crucial to establish clear strategies, and this also on migration, where there are lots of other errors. I mean, what's happened over previous years has happened, and we've seen that the reason was that there was a lack of agreement, because we have seen certain countries open up to genuine war refugees, and they need to be genuine war refugees, and we need to analyse what's happened in the past in a critical manner. We need self-criticism here. We're able to make proposals, and you're very authoritative and credible in doing that. But as a member of the European Parliament, as a political group leader, but also as an Italian, we would ask for two clear proposals to be made. Firstly, strong, clear action, as you said, to deal with the issue of sanctions, and to support that with a compensation fund which links the needs and requirements of individual member states in terms of energy, but also in terms of exports, which is another key factor that may well bring a country such as ours to its knees. And then the second request relates to our national political debate. Giorgia Meloni has asked for a modification of our national plan on recovery and resilience. This is something that has just been launched, but it's already outdated. Article 21 of the RRF envisages that in extraordinary cases you can intervene to change the choices that have been made. And let's face it, that this is a tool that was envisaged for the pandemic and to produce economic growth. But now we've got war. I mean, that's certainly an extraordinary circumstance. So we need to adapt the tool now. This isn't a national issue alone as well. I mean, you, like many others, have said that Italy is the #1 beneficiary of all these resources. And it's there that we need a strong response, because the success or failure of the Italian plan will be the success or failure of the whole strategy. We're not used to simply waiting to see what happens, so we would ask you to assess this proposal in the interest of Italy, but also with a view to young people and European businesses in the future. Thank you very much.
The left group to Martin Schirdewan.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you, President. Prime Minister Draghi, the Italian government is very firmly proceeding against the Russian oligarchs, seizing some of their assets. And then, of course, in order to pay for the costs of maintenance, then, of course, there are seized goods as well. And I would like that the assets that you've seized from the Russian oligarchs be made available in some way to the Ukrainian children to help them feed, and then all these enormous cars as well. You've got a crisis windfall tax for energy companies. They really have to be brought to task to pay what their money, what they owe. And when it comes to big tech and pharmaceutical companies, what about their profits as well? Because there are those who are making a benefit, obviously, and profit from the crisis, the war. What about the defense industry? And you're asking for various kinds of taxes. Bravo, to put a brake on certain things. The German government is actually acting rather hesitantly when it comes to Russian oligarchs, and is being a little hesitant in some other measures. This is Europe. This is the title of the debate, Prime Minister Draghi. So obviously we have to think in terms of the recent past, the financial economic crises, where you played an absolutely marvellous leading role. There are those who called you Super Mario, in fact. And as president of the ECB, then in Greece, you turned the money the tap off for money to the then government, because of course they weren't taking the right kind of measures. But then of course the pensioners, those receiving benefits, all the money in these sectors and also in the health sector, well, the funds just dropped. And the Troika, of course, we saw that when they intervened, the debt was 150% of national debt. It's about 160% now. And all of a sudden, let's just consider if somebody came up with the idea that we had to have the same kind of austerity measures in Italy as in Greece. For example, what if the money was stopped, the money tap was turned off from you as well in Italy? Because, of course, this would cause certain damage. At the time, whatever it takes in the eyes of the public, the big investors and the banks, meant that people thought that Europe would have a good future. But of course now we have exploding energy prices, food prices. If we had a whatever it takes moment to spare people from that, so that wages wouldn't be gobbled up, whatever it takes, if we could protect the climate, that's what we need, and also in the face of dictators. So we need a whatever it takes moment as well for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shirdewan. Next, on behalf of the non-attached members, Tiziana Beghin.
Thank you very much, President Metsola. Mr. Draghi, welcome back to the European Parliament. During the pandemic, we saw how many positive things Europe can do for citizens. As you've said, with Next Generation EU, we saved our economy and created the right conditions for the recovery. With SURE, we set aside billions to help the unemployed and vulnerable people. It hasn't been easy. Many European leaders are sceptical about what we need to do, but solidarity and unity prevailed. Thanks to the EU, Putin didn't get his way in Ukraine, which is good, but not even we have been able to get what we want, namely peace. Colleagues, after more than 2 months of conflict, it's the time to use diplomacy to save the Ukrainian people from further death and suffering. Ukraine's right to defend itself is sacrosanct, but let's not forget that our final objective needs to be peace. But let's learn from these difficult months and start to work towards energy independence for gas from Russian gas and oil. Let's fight the energy pandemic with the same instruments that we used during the health pandemic. Let's replicate the success of the recovery fund and approve an energy recovery fund, and that's what the 5-Star movement wants to do to speed up renewables. Not all member states have been able to use the financial means or have the financial means to get the right investments in renewables. We need Europe's firepower for this, and we need to make sure that Europe is successful once again. And it's shameful that the big oil players make billions from oil, but 1 in 7 Italians can't pay their energy bills because they're too expensive. Galloping inflation is taking away purchasing power from families, and then people wonder why Europeans aren't having children anymore. We need a European minimum salary. I agree, Mr. Draghi, when you say we need to reform Dublin. We need solidarity, we need responsibility, as we've seen with Ukrainian refugees. I'd like to remind you that thanks to the contribution of the 5-Star movement, this plenary voted in the 4 laws for the waste package. You can't use incinerators across all countries, and we need to use we need to make sure we're fully sustainable in Italy as well as everyone. everywhere else. Today is the World Day of Press Freedom. Let's show that we stand true to our values. Let's free Julian Assange, make sure that Europe represents peace. Thank you.
Begin, and that brings to a close the round of speakers, and I once again invite Prime Minister Draghi to take the floor to conclude the debate.
Ma prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare.
Well, let me begin by thanking all the heads of groups for their words of appreciation that they used when talking about my country. That's very important to me. And I must admit, I've been surprised by what you've said and been moved, so thank you again. I'd like to thank the President of the European Parliament, of course, for this opportunity to hold this discussion, which, for me, is the first time since I left the European Central Bank that I've been able to speak in the European Parliament. It's been 3 years that I haven't had that opportunity. Let me go into 2 or 3 specific points before I talk about what I think is our shared goal in terms of our vision for Europe. So a couple of specific points. Would Italy be in favour of an embargo on all fossil fuels? Well, as I said in my introduction, we've supported all sanctions that the EU's decided to levy on Russia, including those on the energy sector, and will continue to do that in the future with the same determination. We need to act, though. We can't simply support sanctions. We need to ensure that we can achieve independence from Russian gas. We're acting in this manner and will continue to act. So we've moved exceptionally rapidly to try and diversify our energy supplies and to speed up investments in renewables. And this we've done at a rhythm that wasn't envisaged last year. And measures taken yesterday by the government also lead to a liberalisation of the authorisation process to set up renewables projects, because this is the only obstacle there is at the moment in Italy and also probably in other European countries. I think we've taken a significant step forward on that for Italy with the decisions we took yesterday. Now, businesses that have made profits and poor families, well, there's no doubt that businesses who are active in the import of fossil fuels and in the electricity sector have made massive profits. Just think about Norway, whose profits just recently were estimated at $150 billion for a country with a very small population, 5 million, I think. The same thing is happening to Italian and other businesses who import fossil fuels. Yesterday, the government decided to renew this tax on businesses' extraordinary profits. So taxes on businesses who've imported products, including energy of all kinds. Taxes have now reached 25% on these extra profits. The total amount we're talking about is around 11 billion if you include the first measure we took and this second measure we've taken. And we've thereby managed to provide a flat rate payment to 28 million people, and these payments have gone to workers and pensioners who are on low incomes. Here I'm talking about the people who are in the lowest income brackets, people who earn up to 35,000 euros a year, and they will all receive this flat rate payment. So it's a very progressive measure which helps the lowest earners and in some cases compensates them for their loss of purchasing power that they're suffering as a result of inflation. So this is a way in which we've been able to help our poorest families without necessarily undermining the solidity of our public finances. And this is very important for us because our finances need particular care. Now, moving on to the environment. When this government took office, it was born as an environmental government. So the climate and the green and digital transitions are the main pillars of what we want to do. The Minister for the Environment, our Minister, Environment Minister, has done an extraordinary job and has done something that it would have been very difficult to imagine even a year and a half ago. The Minister has come up with extraordinary measures. We may well not agree on the super bonus of 110%, and we don't agree on the validity of that measure. Let me give you an example. I don't want to go on at too great length. The cost of making a building more efficient has gone up by over 3 times thanks to this measure. The price of investing in refurbishments has almost tripled because this 110% measure means that there's no incentive for people to bargain on prices. So that's the result. But in any case, things are moving forward in Parliament. The government has done what it can do, and our Minister for the Environment is excellent. Now, changes to the Recovery and Resilience Plan. Well, the first problem here is to ensure that public works continues and that new tenders open up. And yesterday the government earmarked 3 billion essentially to enable businesses to recover 90% of the increase in raw materials costs. This measure was welcomed by industry, of course, industry that is involved in business building infrastructure and is involved in public works, but actually was welcomed right across the board. And this is the path that we've chosen. So before we talk about changing the Recovery and Resilience Plan, let's make it work. I mean, it's not old hat at all. We've respected all our objectives. We'll continue to do it by the end of June, and we'll do the same at the end of December. So it's certainly not outdated. I mean, if it does become necessary to change certain things in some points for some sectors, yes, but specific investments, we don't want to change the Recovery and Resilience Plan completely. I mean, there are certain minor changes that might have to be made, and if there are, then we will make those changes. So those were the things that I wanted to say in terms of specific matters. But now, let me move on to the overall vision that we're talking about today. And I think the nature of what we're talking about is that we basically share ideals, projects and ideas. The European Union faces many challenges. I would like to agree with the last political group speaker who said that the most important challenge we face is peace, and that's clearly the main goal that we need to move towards. The European Union is acting along those lines, as is my government. But there are many other things that we want to achieve as well. And when it comes to all these challenges, the response is that more integration is the best way to go, is the best way to deal with all these challenges. I talked about pragmatic federalism, and that means that for many of these challenges, the only way to go is to tackle them together. And that doesn't only mean pooling our funding. I mean, I'm a banker, and people think that the only thing I think about is money, but that's not the only thing we can do. Dealing with challenges together means designing the solutions together. It means monitoring what we're doing together. It means ensuring that all of us ensure that the money is spent properly. And Italy is fully aware of that. And as you all know, because I've said it many times, Italy is aware that it has a great responsibility when it comes to spending these funds that have come under the Next Generation Fund appropriately. And we will also be responsible when it comes to decisions on energy and decisions on public investment, also the digital and green transitions. These are challenges which are major in scope. You know that certain calculations have been made on the digital and green transitions, and according to those calculations, by 2030 the funding need for the entire European Union is around 2 trillion euros. And these aren't figures that national budgets can come up with. On defence, well, again, there are two goals. Firstly, strategic independence. And we've said several times that a strong Europe means a strong NATO. But in order to achieve strategic autonomy, as I said in my introduction, the first step is to ensure that our military expenditure is more efficient. As I said earlier, we spend 3 times as much as Russia, and it would be unthinkable to do anything effective without making our defence expenditure more effective and more coordinated. And that's why I've called for a conference to look towards that goal. I share the need of achieving independence when it comes to producing certain things that are essential for our continent. Microchips, for example. That's one example, but there are other things that are crucial for our supply chains. And we need strategic independence for those things. The war, but also before the war, recent events, I think, have shown that production chains and markets don't always work in a fluid manner, and problems and bottlenecks can lead to serious crises. So we need to tackle those challenges as well. That's this pragmatic federalism. But I also talked about perfect federalism, the federalism of ideals, and our values are currently facing challenges that are unprecedented since the launching of the European Union. And given those challenges, we need to stand together. That's where this federalism of ideals can be seen. We need to find solutions that are joint solutions, in spite of the fact that we're all very different because of our histories, our traditions, because of our starting points. And that's the real difficulty that we have to get over. And we need to deal with that difficulty in order to be successful as Europe. And let me conclude now by saying that if all of this requires a procedure of treaty change, let's go for treaty change bravely and in a confident manner.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Draghi, and that closes this debate, and we move on to the next one. Thank you very, very much to all.